All right, let's dive in. We've got a really compelling piece to unpack today.
Yeah, definitely a headline grabber.
No kidding. This one's from Voice of America, came out just yesterday.
October 21st, if you're keeping track.
Right, hot off the press. And the title, well, it's quite a statement.
I'll say, pacifism can lead to concentration camps in Ukraine.
And there's more. Anne Applebaum called on Germans to arm Ukraine.
That's a mouthful, but really gets to the heart of the matter.
So today we're going to really dig into Applebaum's argument.
About pacifism, especially in light of, everything going on.
Yeah, the war in Ukraine, Germany's history, it's all connected.
And what's fascinating is where she makes this argument.
Oh, yeah. The setting is almost as provocative as the title itself.
She's accepting the Peace Prize of the German book trade.
In Frankfurt, no less. Kind of ironic, wouldn't you say?
To say the least, accepting a Peace Prize while advocating for military support.
It's like, whoa, hold on a minute. What's going on here?
Makes you think about, different ways to achieve peace.
And it gets even more interesting when you consider the location.
St. Paul's Church, right?
Yeah, a place steeped in history.
The birthplace of German parliamentary democracy, they say.
Talk about a loaded backdrop for a speech about war and peace.
Wow. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
So maybe for our listeners who aren't as familiar with Anne Applebaum.
Yeah, let's give them a little background. She's quite a figure.
She's not just any journalist. She's a historian, a Pulitzer Prize winner.
An expert on totalitarianism, particularly in Eastern Europe.
Her books like Red Famine, Gulag, Iron Curtain.
Heavy hitters, all of them. Essential reading on those topics.
And this year, she released Autocracy, Dictators Who Want to Rule the World.
So clearly, she knows what she's talking about when it comes to dictators.
Right. She spent years studying them, their tactics, their mindsets.
Which makes her argument about pacifism all the more intriguing.
So picture this. She's standing in this historic church.
Accepting a Peace Prize, no less.
And then she drops this bombshell. Pacifism equals accepting dictatorship.
At least in this case, she argues.
A bold statement, to put it mildly.
Not mincing words at all, which is kind of her style.
And she goes on to say that Russia needs to be decisively defeated militarily.
That's the only way to end what she calls the terrible cult of violence in Russia.
Drawing a parallel with Germany's defeat in World War II.
A heavy comparison, but one that makes you think.
And she doesn't shy away from the potential consequences of inaction.
Oh no, she lays it out very clearly, very starkly.
She says, and I'm quoting here, that pacifism in this situation would mean
accepting military conquest of Ukraine, cultural destruction of Ukraine.
the construction of concentration camps in Ukraine, the kidnapping of children.
Wow, those are some heavy words.
No sugarcoating there. Those are fighting words almost.
A deliberate provocation, perhaps.
Maybe, but also a stark warning, and one that's especially relevant.
Given that she's speaking in Germany.
Right. We can't forget the historical context here.
A country where pacifist views are deeply ingrained.
After World War II, there was a real aversion to war, to military intervention.
Many Germans genuinely fear that arming Ukraine will just escalate the conflict.
And Applebaum actually uses that history to make her point.
She turns it on its head almost.
She says those who oppose arming Ukraine because of lessons of German history
are missing the real lesson, which is that appeasement doesn't work.
So she's saying that sometimes you have to fight for peace.
It seems paradoxical, but that's her argument.
And she specifically calls out Germany, saying they have a special responsibility
to stand up for freedom and take risks in doing so.
Wow, those words carry a lot of weight, given Germany's past.
She's not letting them off the hook, that's for sure.
The article quotes her saying, for almost a century we have known that demanding pacifism
in the face of an aggressive, advancing dictatorship can simply mean appeasement.
And acceptance of that dictatorship. She's connecting inaction with complicity.
A bold claim, and one that didn't sit well with everyone, apparently.
The article mentions that some people gave her a standing ovation,
while others, like the head of the association that awards the Peace Prize, criticized her.
Yeah, it just goes to show how complex and divisive these issues are.
They touch on deep-seated beliefs, personal experiences, and national identities.
It's not just an intellectual debate, it's deeply emotional for many people.
Especially for those directly affected by the war in Ukraine.
And then there's the significance of the Peace Prize itself.
Awarded since 1950, it recognizes contributions to peace.
Through literature, science, art, it's a prestigious award.
And it comes with a monetary prize of 25,000 euros. Not too shabby.
It's a prize with a rich history, honoring those who challenge the status quo.
Last year's recipient was Salman Rushdie, who's faced threats for decades.
So it's not just about traditional pacifism, it's about advocating for peace in many ways.
Exactly. And that's what makes Applebaum's speech so thought-provoking.
She's using her platform, her knowledge, to say that sometimes you have to fight for peace.
It seems like a contradiction, but she makes a compelling case.
So is she right? Is military force the only answer?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, how do you really fight for peace?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive on the surface. What do you think? It really makes you question, like, what does it even mean to be a pacifist?
Right. Is it always about nonviolence, no matter the cost?
Or are there times when using force is the only way to stop something worse?
That's the core of her argument, forcing us to confront that complexity.
It's not always so simple like, peace good, war bad, end of story.
She's saying inaction can have consequences just as bad as taking action.
But then does that mean fighting for peace is just an excuse for war?
Well, it depends how you define fighting. I don't think she's saying
Full-blown military intervention every time.
right. It's more nuanced than that.
Right.
But she is saying that letting dictators...
Let's run wild, invade whoever they want, commit atrocities.
It only emboldens them. Like, hey, we got away with it. Let's do more.
Okay, so appeasement is off the table. But has actual pacifism ever worked?
To stop a dictator, you mean? I mean, there are historical examples.
Like Gandhi, right? The civil rights movement in the U.S.
Exactly. Nonviolent resistance has achieved victories.
But those were tough fights, weren't they? And lots of people suffered.
Often met with brutal repression. And even then, success isn't guaranteed.
There's so many factors at play. It's not a simple formula you can just apply anywhere.
Right. And that's where Applebaum gets specific, saying with Russia.
Pacifism is not just ineffective, but dangerous morally.
Because it lets the violence fester, basically giving it permission to continue.
By not fighting back, not helping Ukraine defend itself, we're condoning it.
In a way, yeah. It's tough to hear, but that's her point.
And I can't imagine how this all sits with her husband, Radosław Sikorski.
Poland's foreign minister, right. He's dealing with this firsthand.
The article mentioned he was at the ceremony, adding another layer to it.
Absolutely. This isn't some abstract debate for them. It's deeply personal.
Okay, but for our listeners, those not directly involved in this,
What can they take away from all this? It's a good question.
it's easy to say I'm against war, but what does that mean day to day?
Are we willing to stand up for our values, even when it's risky?
Big question, yeah. And is there a middle ground between pacifism and war?
There's diplomacy, sanctions, humanitarian aid. Those are tools we have.
But are they enough against someone determined to cause harm?
Applebaum seems to think not, in this situation anyway,
And it's interesting how she frames this using Germany's past.
saying they, of all nations, should get the danger of appeasing dictators,
So it all comes down to this balance, right? Wanting peace.
but also needing to protect people from being hurt, oppressed.
Can you really do both at the same time?
That's what we're grappling with here. There's no easy answer.
And Applebaum's speech shows this isn't just theoretical, it impacts lives.
Absolutely. And her argument, even if you disagree with it.
It forces us to confront these consequences, our role in all this.
As individuals, as a global community, how do we want the world to be?
So where does that leave our listeners who might feel overwhelmed by all this?
I think understanding history helps. Looking back at past conflicts.
How did people respond? What worked? What didn't? It gives us perspective.
So, Applebaum's kind of saying, learn from Germany, their mistakes and the successes.
To make better choices and now, right?
Yeah.
Not repeating same patterns.
Exactly. She's not saying this is the answer, but ask the tough questions.
And embrace the messiness of it all, peace and conflict. It's rarely clean cut.
Which is what makes this deep dive so important. It's challenging us.
To think harder, go beyond slogans, really wrestle with these ideas. Yeah, it's a real call to action, you know? And it's all tied to this bigger thing.
Autocracy, right?
Yeah.
Like she sees Russia's actions, not just about Ukraine itself.
But as part of this trend, these authoritarian leaders wanting more power.
Exactly. It's a global pattern. And Ukraine's kind of the flashpoint right now.
So it's almost like the future of democracy is at stake here, too.
That's what she seems to be saying, that the choices we make now.
Have huge consequences, not just for us, but for like generations to come.
And she's pushing us to see those connections, how it all fits together.
That these global problems are all intertwined. We can't just ignore them.
And that we have to actively defend freedom, democracy, even when it's hard.
Man, that's a lot of weight to carry around, but it's true, isn't it?
It makes this pacifism versus intervention debate even more important, I think.
Right. Like, are our old ideas about pacifism even enough anymore?
When you've got these leaders who don't care about rules, who use violence so easily,
It's like we need a new way to think about peace, one that's more.
realistic, pragmatic maybe, acknowledging that power dynamics exist.
And sometimes you do have to stand up to bullies, even if you'd rather not.
And maybe that's Applebaum's real point here. She's not saying
Here's the perfect solution, but more like, wake up, people. Things are changing.
she's forcing us to ask those hard questions, even if they make us uncomfortable.
To confront the ugly truth, that conflict, it's rarely simple or easy.
And it's all connected, back to that autocracy theme. It's a global struggle.
It's kind of wild, right? Getting a peace prize, but giving a speech that's like,
Get ready to fight. The irony is not lost on me, that's for sure.
but that's what makes it so powerful, so memorable. Peace isn't something.
You just get handed. It's something you work for, protect, maybe even fight for.
And so, for our listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive, it leaves us with
A lot to think about, right? We want peace, but how do we achieve it?
when do we draw the line and say, enough is enough, this can't stand?
What's our responsibility, each of us, when we see injustice happening?
Those are questions we each got to answer, but they're not easy, that's for sure.
But they're questions worth asking. That's what Applebaum's shown us.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners some food for thought.
Maybe spark some conversations, inspired you to learn more on your own.
To challenge your own assumptions, because that's how we grow, right?
Absolutely. And thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a good one.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive, so stay tuned for that.